also is entitled to a certain kind of protection with regard to the information. And then, there was a time in Ghana when the head of state passed a law which was called the Urumo Decree. Because people were holding so much information that all that we heard in the streets and whatnot, but this has happened, that has happened. And a lot of lives were negatively affected. So he passed a decree which said that it was against the law for you to be going around telling tales about other people. So it's a matter of how do you control that. And then currently, considering everybody is holding a certain little gadget that they use to pick information, they use to, as it were, sprinkle information as if it's the sowing season and all. I'm beginning to wonder as to whether any free piece of legislation that has to do with the freedom of information is going to be very effective. So maybe for the first time I'm going to have you gentlemen here as my lecturers in law so that I could arm myself with regard to the whole idea of freedom of information, how one accesses it, how one uses it, and the implications of the use of the information that we have. I know that our president is very keen to have this law passed because he believes that it's going to be one of the props for controlling what we have come to know as corruption. So maybe there are two sides or maybe three sides to it. But for today, I'm very happy that we are having this conversation in this embassy because the bill is important to us. And also, maybe all of us are going to have the ability to protect ourselves against the freedom of information. So may I take the opportunity to welcome you honorable people to this symposium and also everybody here. And I hope that maybe like me, by the time we leave here, all of us would have learned a little something about issues that are going to be important to us as individuals or as groups of individuals. Again, welcome to the embassy. And do come here once in a while because like the country Ghana, this is a very friendly edifice. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ambassador, His Excellency Dr. Bafo Ejebewa, for that lovely speech. And as you listeners clearly heard, the ambassador started with a disclaimer, so it's good he put that out there. He's not a member of the panel, but we decided to see him up there because it's just an amazing thing to have him allow us to do this at the embassy, and he rightly admitted that it's an issue that he's not very well versed in and excited about, although I think you would do a very awesome lawyer if you try going back into law school. It's not too late. But yeah, I'd like to invite our event host once again, Kevin Taylor, to take over from me and get this ball rolling. Thanks once again to everyone for coming. We appreciate your presence. My name is Oral Furi.
All right, thank you, Oral. Thank you, Your Excellency. I would like to introduce the guests again so that from my immediate right, we have Mr. Thomas Sussman. He is the Director of Government Affairs Office at the American Bar Association. We also have in the middle seat, right, after Mr. Sussman, Mr. George Bright. He's the editor of the African Post. He's the editor and publisher of the African Post newspaper. My extreme, consider the fine gentleman, the white shirt in there. Yeah, he's Jeffrey Bartlett. That's correct. He's the senior editor at the Pulitzer Center. So these are the gentlemen who will be doing the talking today. The ambassador actually sum up everything. So he'll be doing much talking. Maybe once in a while, he might try to throw something in. He said he'll stay quiet and then. So as the ambassador started, he talked about freedom of information, and we'll try and stick to general issues. Once in a while, we might decide to talk about Ghana specifically, but we just want to tackle the issue broadly so that we can at least have an idea of what the RTI bill actually is. So, my first question is actually going to be, I'm going to start from Ghana. In our constitution, it states somewhere that all persons have the right to information, subject to such qualification and laws as are necessary in a democratic society. So one will ask, why the need for the RTI in Ghana, or why the need for RTI anywhere in the world? Mr. Sussman, if you can take this.
Constitutions are wonderful things, but they're not self-executing. The United States Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, has protections for many freedoms, but without Congress and the courts to give teeth to those rights, the public would simply be able to talk about the Constitution, the media could write about the Constitution, but the protection itself would not be meaningful. Once you have a law in place, and I will say right up front that I read the proposed Right to Information bill. It's very strong. There are over 120 countries that have these legislation in place. And this is one that has all of the important elements that are being adopted across the world. So it would do an exemplary job of incorporating and allowing administration and enforcement of that constitutional right.
Thank you. I think Africa, and for that matter Ghana, has come a long way in terms of information. We used to have something called the culture of silence. You could not speak without looking behind you, and you could not give information without looking behind your shoulder. And there is a saying that in the absence of information, there is speculation. We have come a long way that we've had this opportunity. This bill was laid before Parliament way back in 2003. And this evening, somebody was sharing, we were asking somebody about his opinion. He said, when you're in government, you are for it. When you are out of government, you are against it. I don't know what it meant, but it's like it's balanced. There are some who appreciate it, who welcome it, and there are others who don't really welcome it. But for me as a journalist, my tool is information. Getting the right information is the most important tool for any journalist to be able to put out information out there. So if it's been withheld from you, then there is speculation starts, and all kinds of rumors. And for Africa, that we're trying to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, we're trying to get stuff from the Western world. If information coming out is inaccurate, it really affects us in a lot of ways. So coming up to this point, the most recent information we got from the government was the president speaking at the independence anniversary, and he spoke about the need for this bill, that we are on the path of fighting corruption. Access to information has become a very critical part. But if we look at it this way, we also have, is it every information that we have the right to? And I believe that before we leave here, from the American perspective, they will be able to answer that for us. That there's information that borders on security. Is this something that everybody has to have access to? In terms of a journalist, if we're talking about some money that has been misappropriated, do we want to put out that information? Something that borders on U.S. security, confidential information you want to report on. Is this something that you can really retrieve just because you have the right to? So I believe before we leave here, some of my friends here will be able to answer those questions. But I believe there is a need for that because of speculation in our circles in Africa and for that matter Ghana as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I was informed by what Tom had to say. I would simply observe that democracy has come to be associated with elections in the ballot box, and that's kind of a very small window on what democracy is. Democracy involves a political culture that's much broader than that. It involves people's involvement, it involves a free press, it involves being able to hold members of your government accountable, a sense among the people that they are participating in that government, not just by putting a vote in a ballot box, but that they are holding that government accountable and they can ask questions of that government. In order to ask intelligent questions, you have to have information. And this is a government that is elected by the people, for the people. And those people need to be able to access information in order to know whether that government is performing properly and in order to question properly what that government is doing. So again, it's not, elections are fine and good, and certainly Ghana's been a leader in free and fair elections and an example to others in Africa and its ability to hold elections where there is a peaceful transfer of power repeatedly. But, as all countries, even this country, you need to develop and encourage a political culture that's broader than that. And I think this Freedom of Information bill, the RTI bill, is should be able to contribute to that kind of political culture that empowers people and empowers the press to hold the government accountable.
Jeffrey, I would like to ask, from your background, you've traveled a lot to a couple of countries, which has passed some of these bills. What do you expect from journalists? Normally, when you talk about the right information, citizens in a particular country, they all think it's the work of the journalists to chase information, scrutinize public officials, but when you read the bill very well, you realize that everybody's right to make sure that to be able to access information, whether public or private. So where do you think is the limit of a journalist when you're looking for information to disperse? What will be the limits of a journalist in Ghana, where you, like Mr. Bright talked about, he talked about the boundaries. We could be searching for information, but we need to know our limits. As a journalist or as a citizen, where do you think that the limit is?
Well, I think, I can't delineate every limit, but just as an example, if you were here in the U.S., or you're covering the American military and you find out about a battle plan that's going to be carried out tomorrow or next week or next month, you're not, you generally will not reveal that plan. You generally do not want to put people's lives at risk. But for the most part, you want to make the decision after you get the information. I mean, I think the instinct of a journalist is to get the information first, and then make a decision about, what to do with that information. There are a lot of boundaries. We don't reveal, children are a boundary, right? We don't generally reveal the names of children who are victims of crimes or abuse or what have you. But again, for the most part, we try to access the information and then make the decision after the fact about how to use that information. And I think I would disagree somewhat with what I think the ambassador was conveying, which is that this worry that if you get this information, it will be mishandled or abused. I think in the absence of real information, because the information we're talking about is information that's often data or documents or something very solid that's coming from the government. And in the absence of getting that information, people fill the void, and they, fake news is the popular term these days, but they fill the void with fake news. They start spreading rumors and lies and other things, and they maybe make up stories. But what we're talking about here, I believe, is getting solid information from a government source that is a document or is data that is something that creates transparency, which helps battle that rumor and conspiracy and so on. But I'll also defer to others.
I would observe that the proposed RTI bill has 13 different sections with exemptions. And these exemptions are found in legislation, again, across the world. Personal privacy, trade secrets and commercial information, national security, law enforcement, the office of the president, information relating to a fair trial and contempt of court, privileges are protected. So there are a lot of boundaries that protect what we would feel uncomfortable, even with our friends in the media having unfettered, uncontrolled access to. And now the problem exists, of course, government officials tend to default towards broad reading of exemptions, towards if in doubt, don't let it out. And that's what the commission will do, that's what the courts can do, is hold the bureaucracy to a narrow reading of the exemptions. So exemptions are good, but not if they're overused.
Thank you. So, Mr. George, how important is the Right to Information Bill of such a law to a developing country like Ghana? You know, the United States started this a long time ago, but as a young country, you're 61, quite young in terms of other countries when we compare ages. How important do you think this is to a country like Ghana passing such a bill?
Thank you. Like I said from the beginning, in the absence of information, there's speculation. And for a journalist, your tool is information. And getting the right information is very pertinent to the job that you are doing, because you are the conduit between the government and the community. So if you don't get the right information, you will end up feeding the community with fake news. So for such a bill to be passed is so important that, well, we can hold the government accountable, because they know that you're going to be breathing on their necks for information or data to be able to go and explain to the community. So it's a way, or it's made it easier for us to get the tools to be able to work with and put out the right information to the international community.
If I can take just a second, I had prepared a few notes for a program that I participated in a few weeks ago for a country that was not a democracy. And so it was very challenging for me to try to figure out, how do I make a case for more transparency and open government? And let me suggest the way in which I did that, by doing some research on some of the international organizations and studies, and what they determined in terms of business climate, investment, and transparency. The International Monetary Fund concludes, we find it clear evidence that international funds prefer to hold more assets in more transparent markets. They invest systematically less in less transparent countries. The World Bank researchers, transparency is associated with better socioeconomic reform and human development indicators. Countries ranking higher in the overall transparency index are more competitive in international markets. OECD, OAS, it keeps going. And I'll end with this one. More open governments can attract higher private sector investments and growth. There is compelling evidence that countries with greater fiscal transparency have lower deficits, better credit ratings, and lower borrowing costs. Now, these are economists, and I do not understand the regression analysis and all the charts, very thick papers. But these are very respectable, reputable economists working for international organizations that come to a conclusion that I think is indisputable, and that is transparency is good for the economy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bartlett, I've seen people come on social media and discuss, when I say people, I've seen the co-journalists come on social media and discuss sensitive issues they may be discussed in their boardroom editorial meeting, and they just throw it out there, and then they expect people to share their ideas. But sometimes you could see from what they've written on social media that there's a different twist to it, you know. And then assimilation of information, it depends on each individual. You might read a statement on Facebook and might just read the statement without having any meanings behind it. Somebody might also read it in a different understanding. So I just want to know, in the era of social media and all that, how can a normal citizen differentiate between fake story or fake news? Because when we're talking about the right to information, it's all about people getting access to the information. But the people who are supposed to get access to the information, if they don't handle it well, how are we supposed to know that the information circulating is the right information?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm not sure I have any definitive answers. I would say it's up to individuals to look at the source. And some sources become reputable over time. They've earned a reputation for honest news gathering. And other sources are not reputable and have not earned a reputation for honest news gathering. And so, I turned off Facebook a few years ago, partly for this reason. I found it, there was just too much nonsense coming through, right? So if Facebook is your first source of news, which it is for a lot of young people these days, I think you're going to have to, we have to teach. I don't know. I don't want to say as a journalist you have to teach anybody, but I think people have to teach themselves a little bit. They have to learn, somehow. Be skeptical. Start from a position of skepticism when you read something and say, okay, I'm reading this, but what's the source? And also learn how to read news critically. In other words, as you're reading that story, even if it's from a reputable source, to read the story critically and say to yourself, well, how do they know that? And what are the sources that they are quoting? And this is where an RTI bill comes into play, because you're actually getting information, hard information. Yeah, people are going to put a spin on it. They're going to, two people can take the same piece of information from a government and put a completely different spin on it. But that's where your critical faculties as a reader have to come in. You have to be able to read that and see what are the facts that are in that article and what is the spin, if there is spin. And then, on the basis of that, be able to decide. It's very difficult. It's very challenging these days. It used to be in our country, many decades ago, that people would turn on the nightly news and it would be Walter Cronkite, and the whole country was watching Walter Cronkite, and it was sort of the voice of God, right, about whatever the news story of the day was, and we'd listen to him, and were listening to the same source. But that's not the case anymore. I'm reading one source, the person next to me is reading another, the other person's reading something else. It's a great challenge. I mean, you raise a good issue, but I don't think it has much. I think, if anything, the RTI bill helped, and I don't know the specifics of the bill, and I'd like to defer to Tom on that, anything related to the specifics of the bill, but I think greater access to information from the government, hard information, can only help produce more, better news reports.
Yes.
Sure.
Let me just throw in something, and something short. I believe the mark of every good journalist or news agency is your credibility. It's so important that when you put bad information out there, it's very difficult for somebody to give you access to come and to be granted an interview and to go and then do further damage. So for us, that are capable of putting wrong information out there, our credibility also means a lot to us. It just so happens that we have a lot of people parading as journalists who are not upholding the ethics of the profession. And this is what has generated the uproar with fake news. Thank you.
I've just been wondering whether the whole idea of the freedom of information is supposed to give one the opportunity to have a check on the government, especially with a view to reducing the tyranny of democracy, because it could be, very, tyrannical, even though democracy is not supposed to be tyrannical. But that said, and on the question of a good journalist, picking information and such, I have never heard of a journalist, for instance, who has written a piece against the viewpoint of the owner of the newspaper. So how do you marry the two? No, because obviously everybody will have a certain kind of slant on the news. And I'm quite sure that any journalist who, even if it's out of conscience, who goes directly opposed to what the owner of the paper feels or thinks, may well not have a handle on his job for too long.
I differ just a second, because I think there have been at least one, I don't remember exactly what it was, but at least one story in the Washington Post that was critical of Amazon recently. And I know at my old employer, which isn't really it's a completely different magazine these days, but Newsweek most recently has gone through a horrible time where their owners were, the new ownership was up to some shenanigans and tried to press their editors and reporters to not cover shenanigans they were up to. And they fired the chief editor, and the editors that stepped into their place went ahead, continued investigating the people that were running the magazine, and published a story eventually with something at the top explaining what had happened and where they came from. So it's not. It does happen. People are at institutions that are really solid, and even one like Newsweek these days, it's not as solid as it should be. Journalists are, if they're taking an ethical approach to what they're doing, will have the freedom to write against the ownership of the publication. I know it's difficult, and I'm sure it's especially difficult in a place like Ghana where jobs are harder to come by, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, I'd like to observe that. I think that's a wonderful question, but Mr. Ambassador, you're assuming one newspaper, and I think the reality is that where there's a free press and an internet, the public has access to many sources of biased information, perhaps. And that's why the more transparency, the more people, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, academics, historians can have access to the public's ear and eyes through the internet, through electronic media. Now, that goes back to your original question, and that is, how does the public know what's true and what's not true? And we're certainly struggling with that in the United States these days. There's a whole new sort of discipline called media literacy that works to train. They did projects in the Ukraine to train people how to read and understand Russian propaganda from true news. And I think we're going to have to invest a lot more time and energy in educating, civics education, and educating our public to be skeptical readers, so that they can sort out the fake from the legitimate.
Okay, so this next question is actually open to everyone. As the ambassador said, but when you go to Ghana, most of the media outlets are owned by prominent people. Majority of them being politicians, and then you could be one of the best journalists, but you know where to tread if you really want to keep your job. So then it becomes difficult for a journalist to come out and talk about what he or she has found. At this point, it becomes difficult as a journalist, because now you choose between ethics or you choose between your job. Because when you try to be the righteous one, you're going to lose your job. And jokingly, you said it's very difficult to find a job in Ghana. I think we're doing good now. We're doing good. So it all ends up with credibility. So what I wanted to ask is, the president has actually called someone in to be the special prosecutor in Ghana. He's a renowned person, he's knowledgeable, He's been in the field of trying to protect the country's government by trying to defend the country in court and all that. Someone will say, why do we need the RTI bill if the Special Prosecutor's Office is set up? Because at the end of the day, he's going to do the same thing. He's going to hold past and present people who hold government offices in check. So, do you think that a country like Ghana setting up the Special Prosecutor's Office, we will also need the RTI bill? Do we need to pass that? Because some people have raised the argument that it kills the idea of having the right to information.
Thank you. I think the Office of the Special Prosecutor and and there are two different things, looking at different angles altogether. Because what information that the Special Prosecutor is privy to cannot be the same information that the public can access. I believe that they go deeper into whatever they need. It's like the privilege of a lawyer. A lawyer has access privileged information than anybody else, even than your wife, you see. So I believe that what they can access is different from what a journalist can access, right? And then theirs is not for public consumption, the information, because a case in court, it can be contempt of court. If a case in court is in court, you cannot bring the information outside. So I believe there are issues looking at different angles. So we cannot say, yes, right. It's necessary, and the right to information bill is necessary as well.
I can perhaps give you a specific example. We have a special prosecutor, special counsel in the United States now, looking at the administration and a lot of people involved in our election and in our government. He couldn't begin to police accountability across the board. Yesterday, timely release of a document called FOIA, a Colossus Under Assault. But the first paragraph talks about this is a tiny sampling of stories made possible by the Freedom of Information Act just in the last year. We know that from FOIA, how the Drug Enforcement Agency was hamstrung from going after suspicious opiate shipments, how the Environmental Protection Agency administrator was personally involved in scrubbing climate change data from his website, how Afghanistan and Iraq wars proceeded from the Secretary of Defense's desk, how suspicious deaths of Russians are connected to Vladimir Putin on American soil. It goes on. Treasury Department, Veterans Department. There's no way in which a single office. The wonderful thing about right to information is you have thousands of special counsels, because the media and nonprofit organizations and other members of the public make the public into an entire core of checks on administration wrongdoing. And you don't need criminal prosecution and subpoenas to be able to do that.
Okay. So some people have also argued that when people are giving so much information, access to information, it endangers the democracy of a country. And at the end of the day, not everybody can handle the information the way it's supposed to be handled. And then so most African countries, most politicians in Africa, they try to stay or take a step away from that, because most of them make promises and somehow don't fulfill it because something happened or someone is supposed to be blamed for that. But the strong point is people don't want to give people so much room. They don't want to give them so much access to public information, because it can taint the democracy. Because, you know, when you go to Ghana, you can read a newspaper, like the ambassador said, and know where the editor is coming from. You might be a new person in Ghana, but the moment you read the first paragraph, you'll be like, oh, this journalist is with this party or that party. So don't you think passing this bill is really going to endanger democracy in Ghana?
Well, I believe he read something in one of his presentations that transparency is of utmost importance to getting aid. everything that you're looking for from the Western world. They look at how transparent the government is. So would you rather get that for developmental purposes or protect your administration from releasing information that is going to hurt your democracy? Just stick with the limits. For any administration, you just then entrench clauses, like you said. Military, children, and a whole lot of information that you have the excuse to withhold. But if it's information that you are about to release, right, for transparency's sake, I think it's in your government's interest to release that information.
I'm sitting here, I'm trying to think of a country that suffered a cataclysmic civil war or an economic breakdown, collapse because there was too much transparency and too much information going to the public. And for the life of me, I can't think of one. There probably is some place out there that had too much transparency, but I can think of, I've been to many countries that have suffered from the opposite. Not enough transparency, not enough information, and suffered grievous harm. People, a lot of lives lost. So, I'm not sure I understand the question really, in the sense that, is it really a danger? What's the danger? The danger is that there's going to be transparency about government workings with the checks that Tom has mentioned. I mean, there are a lot of exceptions to the rule on that. So I just don't. I can't see it. What's the danger?
Well, liberty comes with a cost. The freedoms that any democratic and open society have for individuals to speak freely, to gather, always has a danger that someone is going to incite to riot, or someone's going to hit someone else, or someone's going to steal something. But we don't respond by putting everyone in shackles and silencing everyone because they might say something that is offensive or dangerous. And so the same with information flow. It's out there. Sure, there's some people who are going to misuse it. There's some. I noticed that the proposed legislation has a provision that prevents vexatious and frivolous requests. We don't have that in the United States, and most of our government officials on a daily basis say, "Oh, I wish we had something like, we should adopt Ghana's RTI law because it would protect us from vexatious and frivolous requests." We can't stop those. But the question is, do we not have a law that allows for access to information just because there will be people making frivolous requests? And we answered that question a long time ago.
So this is to Mr. George. They're going to have their chance to ask questions. This might be the last one. As a journalist, a Ghanaian journalist in the United States, sometimes you like to verify some information back home before you publish it. Maybe most of your stories are from here, but once in a while I know you try to publish stories back from home, from Ghana. Have you actually encountered these blockages, trying to get information, cross-checking before you make sure that you put a story out there?
If you ask me what are some of the challenges to my job here, I would say getting information from Ghana, or getting the right information from home. Sometimes you can see the death, you can read about the death of a president. Recently we read about the death of former president of South Africa, and even GBC reported it. The Ghana Broadcasting Corporation reported it without consulting the South African embassy in Ghana, and it turned out to be fake news. So if a whole institution like the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation could make such a mistake, you can tell how you can put your credibility on the line. And for us, those of us working here, if you report bad, you can be sued, and it's big. It's going to cost you big time. It's not the same back home. Like knowing somebody, it can be swept under the carpet. It's a different story. So those of us here, we try to play it safe, because Maybe you don't have money to have a legal representation in case you get sued, or you put your credibility on the line. For us here, it's a different story altogether than those of us, those operating in Ghana. So we also rely on other sources for credible information. If somebody tells me, have you heard this news? I say, okay, let me go to BBC. I've always trusted the credibility of BBC or CNN, even though it might be skewed a little bit, but at least I have my credible source. If it's from BBC, if it's from CNN, I know it's been well investigated before coming out. So that's how we all play it safe here.
Is there a line, whether fine or broad, between national security and freedom of information? And who determines that line?
There is a line. The government determines that line. While we have theoretically access to the courts to challenge that, the judges do not second guess a government official who files in court an affidavit saying that disclosure of this information would endanger national security for the following reasons. It can't just be a general assertion, but has to provide reason. That's not usually public. That's information provided to a judge. And we have a history of protecting national security information. Now, after a certain period of time, the argument of national security gets a little stale, so that information about things that happened 20, 30, 50 years ago, we still have government bureaucrats saying national security. In those cases, sometimes the courts will step in and say, we don't see that anymore. But in terms of current national security, international affairs, military affairs, Central Intelligence Agency, we have a very strong history and understanding that there will be protection and not transparency in those areas, because lives can be endangered and our nation's best interests are not served.
All right, so at this point we're going to hand the mic over to Earl to tell us what to do next.
Thank you, Kevin Taylor. It's been an amazing past few half hours so far, and I really appreciate the responses and comments from the panel. I want to turn the opportunity over to the audience and ask if anyone has any question or even any contribution that they feel might help the success of this event. And mind you, if your question cannot be answered because it's directed in a certain way that, does not give the panelists an opportunity to respond to that question, then we would have to ignore that question, unfortunately. But hopefully, you've heard the members of the panel speak, and so your questions and your contributions would be addressed and pointed in a way that would be beneficial to each and every one of us here. So if you have any question, if you raise your hand, I'll bring the mic over to you.
Thank you. My name is Bob Becker, and what I have to say is I think an important distinction here, which is I think we started off talking about the right to know law, and what I have really heard is a debate about freedom of the press, and the two are not the same. And Tom Sussman pointed out something that's very important that illustrates the distinction, which is in this country, the biggest users of the Freedom of Information Act are corporations, not the media. Below them are prison inmates, and somewhere below them are news reporters. Freedom of information is about transparency across the board. And if you get lost in the issue of how the media what you think about the media or how the media uses information, you miss the real issue here. And Tom said it, economic development is one of those issues. Government corruption is another one of those issues. So I'd like to hear how you, the Ghanaians here, are going to go forward and try to parse that out.
Thank you, sir. Anyone in the panel want to address this?
Before I turn the microphone, I will point out that Mr. Becker is a former journalist, currently a lawyer representing the Society of Professional Journalists. So he is, plus a freedom of information expert. So he knows what he's talking about.
Thank you. Ghana is only 61 years old. We have come a long way in terms of information, and this is a learning experience for us. So forums like this give us the opportunity to be able to learn and also pass information to our fellow journalists and other people working in the media, and also to the government. We are at the Embassy of Ghana, so I believe we have government representatives here who can also share this kind of knowledge that we are all acquiring here. So I would say going forward, I think your contribution is very much welcome, and it's a big learning experience for us. That this is not just for newspaper printers, publishers, and editors, but for corporate institutions. And then this is the first time I'm even hearing about prison inmates needing that information. So I believe it's a learning experience, and going forward, I believe that we're all going to use that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. This is a follow-up to Mr. Becker's question, because we have the second Speaker of Parliament actually on record saying that the Right to Information Bill is not a matter of priority for the Parliament. Purposely for that reason that you raised, because in their opinion, the information is only, profitable or useful to the media and not to the citizens. We haven't got to the level where we are, I would say, we deem it useful to go after, government, to realize that the government is accountable to us, not the other way around. And for some reason, Ghanaians feel like, we are accountable to the government, and that whatever the government dishes out is what we should receive. So it's a good question, but I can say for a fact that we're not there yet, and it's very, very sad. But like I said, the Speaker of Parliament is on record for saying that, purposely because in Ghana, unlike the US, where ministers and LPs, congressmen, as you have here, are not accessible to the media. In Ghana, it's the other way around. Every media house has the phone number or access to a member of parliament or a minister. So whatever it is, that you need information on, they just pick up the phone and call them, and they come on radio to answer. So they think that the information that you want, the citizens want, is readily available if they want it. So you don't need to pass a bill to that effect. And like you said, it's not only the citizens that need it. However, it's corporations that want to see the facts. And I'm not sure about the business, but that's what besides that. Thank you.
I just wanted to add something. I used to work in a company in Ohio, and we used to do a lot of FOIA requests. But the good thing about it was for due diligence. If you want to know more about a company you're investing in or you want to partner with or something, it really helps a lot because that information is not readily available. So in that vein, it's very good. And also for economic development, like you were saying, because it helps you know exactly where to maybe invest and where not to. So that is totally different from corruption, Like you said, that's probably maybe for the journalists, maybe the third layer. But for FOIA requests, usually it's for due diligence and knowing more about a company or some product or something.
Okay, I want to ask about the issue of transparency. In that, if we have the right to information, and then the right information is not given, because in Ghana it looks like we get most information from when the opposition party or gives us more information than the party in government. So now you want the information, we give you. What if it's red and they give you yellow? How do you know? Because at the end, it's still not representative. You still can't give the right picture of it. So how do you, I mean, as a journalist or as an institution, know there's the right information?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I am a reporter myself, and in my attempt to answer your question, I would say it's the responsibility of every journalist, reporter, or anyone who shares, information to the public or to a select few, to make sure that they check their information, check the sources. In the olden days, my mentor would tell me to double check, but now we're in the era of fake news. And so I tell myself to triple check. And then I step out there and I see someone who's been in the journalism institution for 4 decades, and they tell me, look, my brother, triple check. So it's very important to make sure that you're checking and double checking and rechecking your facts, compare it to what is out there. And thanks to the proliferation of information, you can go online, but then again, there is still stuff there that is not very appropriate. But ask yourself, what you're putting out there, does it put your credibility at stake? Ask yourself, what you're putting out there, does it make the job you're doing and the people you're representing in that field of profession, does it make them look good, or do you ruin the game for everyone else? But I'm going to pass the mic over to the experts and see what they have to add to this.
Oh, okay, if this information is given freely, I'll quote my source. Unless the person doesn't care about their credibility, they should care about whatever they're also giving to me. Because in that case, if I put out a story, I'll quote my source.
And I think that you have to distinguish between documents and data, which is mostly what journalists are looking for from a government, and not looking for somebody from the parliament to make a statement on radio. That's a form of information, but it's not the kind of information we're talking about here. We're talking about hard information that you get from the government. Could be contracts, it could be land sales, it could be, but you're looking for the documents, not for somebody to tell you something. Which is a different thing, and so I just want to distinguish. It's not just a matter of getting somebody's, because when government officials tell you something, it's not necessarily the truth, right? You're looking for hard information, documents, data, stuff that you can then take somewhere else, ask other people about. You get a contract, or you get a land sales documents or land sales data, then you go and you talk to the people that are listed in those documents, and you ask them. But now you've got something hard in your hands that you can build a real report around, as opposed to just hearsay or what somebody told you. And so I think that's what we're talking about with the RTI. I'm not that familiar with the RTI bill, but I think that's what we're talking about with this bill, is real data. And I think the question, you've mentioned the exemptions, is that the right term? I mean, if it gets implemented, the thing that some people are going to have to be concerned about in Ghana is the extent to which those exemptions are manipulated. In other words, now that contract becomes a national security issue, right? Maybe there's a contract with the government for the government that has to deal with mineral resources and the extraction of mineral resources, or maybe and they say, well, that's a national security issue. This is So, so you can't see that document, and that will be part of the battle that goes on later with the courts and others to see, how far you can push that if you're a journalist, and if you're trying to, protect that information or deny access to it or deny transparency, how far you can, take that.
Two additional points. One, on the subject of a government official changing or doctoring a document before making it public, but for political reasons or personal reasons, or to cover something up. I mean, that might have worked 50 years ago, but today, in the era of electronic information, scanning, photocopying, there's another copy out there. Someone else has seen it. Wiping the hard drive doesn't wipe the data. So it's a very dangerous thing for a government. And we've had cases like that, and I've seen articles where two documents side by side, one released by the agency and the other one was released by a government, by a whistleblower, the real document. And of course, the guy who released the first one got fired. That happens, it does. And the other point, it seems to me that it's not just the single person who's requested the information who makes a decision. Let's see, do I give this or don't I give this? The RTI bill has very good controls. There's internal appeal within the agency to a higher level. So it gets it out of the hands of the person who perhaps has something to hide. It then can go to a commission, which is independent of the department or agency, and then can be challenged in court. So it's a very robust set of controls on just this kind of manipulation or false information that a government official might be tempted but could never get away with.
I just have a quick question now. So from what I just said, it means it's a whole new office a government has put up. So then the government can't have an excuse that it's going to drain the government.
Cost?
Yeah.
We hear that, of course, on a daily basis. Rights cost money to enforce. I mean, I don't want. Do you realize the cost to society of due process in the courtrooms? I mean, it would be a lot easier. Summary execution, or star chamber jailing without a trial. Very cheap, very cheap. But as a free and democratic society, we don't do that. We protect people's rights when they're accused of a crime. And the same thing with you have a constitutional right to information. Hopefully you'll soon have a statutory right, and it will come with some cost, because the enforcement of these rights that are important to the public, that are important to business, that are important to the nation for economic development, will come at a cost. And the government will have to make some decisions, and they're never easy decisions, and the cost is often underestimated, which is why it needs to be done in stages. But the commission is a very important check on making sure the process works. So if I were to recommend where my first investment would be, it would be on training the bureaucracy to understand the law and understand that they have a responsibility for complying with it, and in setting up the commission so that you have an external independent overseer to make sure that the law is carried out, and to help with training and to help with guidance.
I just had a quick question for clarification. How is the concept of open data in Ghana? If you have open data, maybe you may, citizens will have access to more information. They may not have to file for RTI request. And also, how you ensure that the people who request for information can afford? Because I think all the RTI law has a fee that people have to pay, but it should not be exorbitantly high that people cannot afford.
Anyone wants to address this question?
I don't think, as of now, we have any mechanism in place for paying money to collect information. Yes, if the law has not been passed yet, so people are not even obligated to give you information in terms of data, right? Because we don't have the law. It's after the law has been passed that maybe they will be obligated to give you the data as and when requested. But currently, there's nothing like that in place for you to pay money and get data unless it's for commercial purposes, like you're looking for seismic data for investment into petroleum or geophysical information. But other than that, we don't have anything in place. So for now, I would say information is free.
We'll take just 2 more questions and we'll bring this to a close. Okay, thank you, Ora. I really appreciate that we're having this forum because I think that as Ghanaians, and I think this question goes to the Ghanaian journalists here, we've been dilly-dallying for this RTI bill for years. And I think on Monday, if I heard the president right, he said that he will make sure that the bill will get to Parliament and passed. And when we have a president with a majority in Parliament saying that, it's a huge assurance. But then we don't know whether he meant this 7th Parliament until they rise in 2020, or he meant this year when proceedings in Parliament comes to an end. So as journalists gathered here, and I think that this forum is a feather into letting the government understand that Ghanaians are paying attention, journalists, even those in the diaspora, are really paying attention. But I don't think it should stop here. So what are you doing to make sure that even though the president has said this, it was a huge Independence Day speech, but then we're making sure that it's getting done. It's not going to be like what we've heard in the past. Matamel said it, Mahama said it, now Akufo-Addo also said it. What is going to happen? And hopefully it's going to be done this year. Thank you. Well, I'll attempt to respond to this quickly. First of all, one of the reasons we're doing this is to play our part in helping respond to that part of your question of what is going to happen. We've heard the public in the diaspora especially send us information, send us requests, and send us questions asking that what's going on with the RTI bill. And myself and Kevin Taylor, we talked about it, and we figured a forum like this would present a great opportunity for us to get the ball rolling, just get some talk out there in the public space. Now, as far as what are we going to do, we're going to share the information we've been able to obtain here so far with everyone out there. We're going to put it on our blogs, on our websites. George is going to carry some in his newspaper. We're going to share it online, and hopefully it goes out there. But of course, we on our own as journalists and reporters cannot insist that this bill is passed, even though the president said it was going to get passed. We are, however, going to keep hope alive and pray that we get to a point or a stage in the history of our country where this bill will cease being a bill and rise from the papers, get ratified, and become a law. But until then, we can keep sharing and re-echoing what the public wants. What the public wants is not what the journalist wants. The journalist is supposed to re-echo and share the sentiments of what the public wants. And we are not here to speak to the government and say, do this and do that. It's not in our place. I don't know if there is any journalist who is somewhere that feels that they can coerce the government into making things happen their way. But, so yeah, to respond to your question, that is what we're going to do. Did you have a question, ma'am?
Thank you. My name is Joyce Williams. I just have an observation because from the ambassador's remark up until the conversation that we've had, I think that two things come to play: intent versus perception. Intent behind what this bill
seeks to accomplish, and the perception on both in the Ghanaian community in Ghana, overseas, and then also in the minds of lawmakers as to why do people want this bill. And I think that the conversation really focused on a lot more on what the journalists are going to use this information for versus what private citizens or companies will use this information for. So my question to Kevin is there any consultative process where there's a dialogue between people who are for this bill, who are proposing this bill, to really change maybe the perception or also convince lawmakers that, wait, this is not out to get you or to embarrass the nation, but this is out to be used for such purposes, including really sharing what is going on, information and other things that are positive and negatives, both happening in the country, in order to have a really honest conversation and address those issues.
Thank you, ma'am. Kevin, process your answer while I take the last question.
Hello, my name is Fred Cheme. I'm the publisher and editor of the Ghanaian American Journal, digital news magazine. My question is a general one. In your opinion, do you think statute of limitations are often employed by governments to limit information flow? As we've seen even here in the United States, statute of limitations are used and say, you know, a certain piece of information cannot be released for 20 years. Why do governments employ that if they have, you know, FOIA laws? And the second question is, do we really think information, when it's released, is fully released? Because oftentimes we see that information that is released to the public is hugely redacted. Can you, you know, express your views on this and, you know, tell us if information, when it's released, is it really free? You know, if it's, you know, there's that amount of reduction in the information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, I'll have you respond to beautiful lady's question, and then any member of the panel can take up the issue of reduction of information and release information data.
Yeah, so to respond to your question, most people in Ghana, from what I know, don't even believe that the RTI or the Right Information Bill consents them. They think it's a journalistic thing about it. It's all about, so what are they going to do about it? You know, so they feel like, I don't need to go look for the information. It's the work of the journalist. So I think the problem too is, you know, people are so attached to their political parties. You know, the idea of a political party, they just follow the idea. So it becomes difficult for them to even accept that there's something going on and that this bill is going to cut across. It could be passed this year, but it's going to last for 17, 18, 20 governments that comes to pass. So it's all about educating the people. When you go to Ghana and you talk about the RTI bill, trust me, somebody doesn't even know it. And the moment you try to explain it, the answer they're going to give you is, oh, let it. The journalists, they'll find it. But it's the right of every Ghanaian to get access to information, to make sure that you know what your MP, you know what your minister, this institution, how they manage issues. So it becomes difficult. The question is very difficult to answer, especially when people have not been educated about why the RTI is supposed to pass. It's supposed to pass to help the people. It's not supposed to pass to help journalists, as we've been saying all along. He tried to make that argument by saying that we're trying to make a mistake here. You know, this year we're going to have I think the freedom of press. I think they're going to have the yearly annual meeting in Ghana, and it's so bad to know that they're going to have it in Ghana, but we don't have a bill like that. People don't even have access to information. But the whole press is going to gather in Ghana and speak nice, good English, and then at the end of the day, just walk away. So I think it's about education. People should be told, people should be educated on who it's actually going to benefit. And with me, when I meet people, I'm like, let your voice be heard because it's going to benefit you. You're paying taxes. You expect to know what your money or whatever is happening in the government institution or even private is being used for. That's the main reason why people want access to information. That's how far I can go with your question.
I believe to go back to Watson, he was asking whether the president was talking about 2020 or this year. I believe that he was referring to the sitting of parliament that ends this year in September. So that this is the first time we've had a timeline on this discussion about the RTI bill. And there is a saying that wisdom is not in the head of one person. What we have all learned here today is a big learning experience for us. And talking about some of the points from Mr. Sussman, if maybe we haven't had enough education for the Ghanaian population, if people had known the benefits of passing this bill, I believe it would have been passed long ago. I believe there hasn't been enough education on this issue. That is why it has delayed so long. But if we talk, I don't know if we have anything like transparency index. We have corruption index. But if transparency index is to be put in place before you get aid or you get something from the Western world, I believe that we would have hurriedly passed this bill. And then transparency is the key on this issue. So at this point, thank you.
I'll briefly address the redaction issue, and that is a redacted document is better than no document at all. And in fact, we fought very hard to get specific language in the statute in the United States that's required agencies to release documents with the protected information, personal privacy, the names of children, the addresses, the trade secret information, redacted out of the document, and the rest of it made public, so that you can get the contract, but perhaps you don't get the trade secrets that are included in part of the technical appendixes to the contract. So my own view is that yes, there may be over redaction, and that again is what the appeal is for. In the United States, my advice is always appeal, because you almost always get something more that was redacted the first time through. So yes, it can be a problem, but it's also something, it's better than nothing, and it can be overcome with appeals and challenges.
Thank you, sir, and to everyone who responded. We appreciate your responses. I'd like to give this gentleman an opportunity to make a contribution, and after which I would, or actually before which I'd apologize to anyone who feels I did not give them the opportunity to respond. But we've been here for quite a while, and there is some food out there. It's getting cold, and so permit me to end this after this gentleman addresses the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Alma, and I'm like any Ghanaian who is living here. I think that there's been so much emphasis on the media, but for someone like me, sometimes we need information too, for academic purposes. I remember 2 years ago, I was writing a thesis for my master's, and I needed information from one of the Ghanaian ministries, and it took me 5 months, and I didn't get anything back. But then I changed the topic and decided to, do an understudy with Botswana and Mauritius, and I got the information back in 24 hours. So it can tell you, the kind of process that we've involved ourselves in. I think that our government don't really understand the democratic